Imagine landing in a foreign country, excited to experience something new, only to slowly realize that someone else has already decided how things should work. And surprise, it's not the locals. Not because they asked, not because they agreed, but because someone assumed their way was the way. And this is where the story usually begins. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. All over the world, there's a familiar moment people quietly recognize. It happens in cafes, offices, classrooms, airports, even family dinners. An American arrives, sometimes confidently, sometimes unknowingly, and before long the room starts bending. Not violently, not loudly, but subtly. Conversations switch language. Customs get questioned. Jokes get explained. And suddenly, the local way of doing things feels optional. At first, it doesn't look like forcing culture. It looks like confidence, certainty, comfort in one's own norms. But confidence, when exported without curiosity, has a way of turning into something heavier. Take language, for example. In many countries, speaking English is a skill, not an identity. It's a tool people switch on when necessary, then happily switch off. But when Americans travel or work abroad, English doesn't arrive as a tool. It arrives as an expectation. Menus should be in English. Menus should be in English. Jokes should land in English. And if they don't, there's often confusion, or worse, impatience. Locals notice this immediately, because they didn't ask visitors to adapt to them. They simply expected mutual respect. But instead, they find themselves translating their own lives in real time, simplifying humor, flattening expressions, and apologizing for accents they've spoken with their entire lives. And the thing is, no one says anything out loud. They just notice. Then there's humor. American humor travels loudly. Sarcasm gets explained. Subtlety gets missed. Everything needs context, punchlines, or reassurance that it's just a joke. In places where humor is dry, ironic, or uncomfortable by design, American reactions can feel like someone interrupting a performance to ask why everyone isn't laughing yet. Food is another battlefield. A quiet one. In many cultures, meals aren't just fuel, they're rituals. Timing matters. Portions matter. Silence matters. But when American habits show up, rushing meals, customizing dishes, asking for substitutions, sauces on the side, ice in everything, it can feel like the meal itself is being negotiated instead of experienced. Again, no one gets angry. They just notice the shift. The waiter pauses longer. The host forces a smile. The table grows quieter. Work culture? That's where things really clash. In some countries, hierarchy matters. In others, it doesn't. Some value speed, others value precision. Some cultures avoid confrontation, while others treat it like honesty. When Americans bring their workplace mindset abroad, the meetings, the motivational language, the let's circle back, the urgency, it can feel like an invisible takeover. Suddenly, everyone is expected to speak up more, sell themselves more, move faster, think bigger, smile wider. And if they don't, they're labeled shy, passive, unmotivated, or resistant to change. But from the local perspective, nothing is wrong. The system worked long before anyone arrived to optimize it. What makes this so fascinating is that most Americans don't intend to impose anything. They genuinely believe they're being helpful, efficient, open, direct. They assume their way works everywhere because, back home, it often does. That assumption is the quiet problem. Because culture isn't software you install. It's a memory. It's history. It's habits passed down without instruction. And when one culture enters another with the belief that its norms are universal, the imbalance becomes obvious fast. In Europe, this shows up in debates about tipping, work-life balance, and personal space. In Africa, it appears in misunderstandings about time, respect, and community. In Asia, it surfaces in reactions to individualism versus harmony. In Australia, it's often met with humor, until it isn't. What's interesting is how quickly Americans themselves feel confused when the world doesn't adapt back. When people don't smile as much. When service feels less performative. When rules aren't flexible. When jokes don't land. When enthusiasm isn't returned at the same volume. That confusion often turns into frustration. And frustration sometimes turns into commentary. Online, in travel stories, in videos, in posts saying how cold, rude, or backward another place felt. But from the other side, the story sounds very different. Locals talk about feeling invisible in their own country. about conversations bending around American comfort, about being corrected on their own traditions, about being told how things are supposed to be done. And here's the twist. The more Americans try to bring everyone together under one cultural umbrella, the more resistance quietly builds. Not loud resistance, not protests, just distance, politeness, short answers, fewer invitations, a subtle wall that says, "You're welcome here, but you're not the center." The irony is that American culture itself is built on diversity, borrowing, blending, and reinvention. Yet when exported, it often arrives as a finished product rather than an evolving one. And people notice that too. This doesn't mean Americans are villains. Far from it. Many are generous, curious, open-hearted travelers who genuinely want connection. But good intentions don't erase impact. And confidence doesn't replace awareness. The countries where Americans integrate best aren't the ones that feel familiar. They're the ones where Americans slow down, listen more, and resist the urge to compare everything to home. Because the moment someone says, "Back in the US, we do it this way," a quiet line is drawn. And once that line exists, the culture clash is already happening. What the world reacts to isn't American culture itself. It's the assumption that it should naturally rise to the top everywhere it goes, that it should be understood without explanation, accepted without adjustment, and centered without invitation. The truth is, every culture believes it makes sense. That's what culture is. The difference is how much space it leaves for others. And when Americans stop trying to export their way of life as the default and start treating it as one story among many, something surprising happens. Doors open, conversations deepen, humor lands differently. And suddenly, instead of forcing culture, Americans become part of it. So the real question isn't why Americans clash with other cultures, it's whether they're willing to let go of being the reference point. Because the world isn't anti-American. It's just tired of being expected to translate itself. If you've ever witnessed a moment like this, as a traveler, a local, or an outsider watching it unfold, you already know how subtle, awkward, and fascinating these clashes can be. And that's why people keep talking about them. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you seen American culture clash with local customs where you live, or where you've traveled? Did it feel funny, frustrating, awkward, or eye-opening? Drop your experience in the comments. And trust me, you won't be the only one. If this made you think, share it with someone who loves travel, culture, or debates that don't have easy answers. And just when you think the story ends there, it actually gets more interesting, because the reactions don't stop when Americans leave the room. Part 2 of this conversation usually happens later. Quietly, between locals. After the visitor is gone, that's when people start comparing notes. Not in anger, but in disbelief. How quickly the atmosphere changed. How conversations suddenly felt rehearsed. How certain behaviors were excused as just how Americans are, even when no one asked them to be that way. And this is where something subtle happens. People begin preparing in advance for Americans. English phrases? Get ready. Explanations? Get simplified. Expectations get lowered. Not out of respect, but out of experience. Some countries even joke about it. Others tolerate it. A few push back hard, but almost everywhere the same unspoken rule develops. Adapt first, avoid conflict later. What's rarely discussed is how exhausting that becomes, because constantly adjusting your tone, your humor, your pace, and your values to fit someone else's cultural comfort zone takes energy. Over time, it creates distance, not connection. Locals become polite, not warm. Helpful, not open. Friendly, but guarded. And Americans often misread that politeness as acceptance. They leave thinking everything went great. Meanwhile, the culture they stepped into quietly resets itself once they're gone. This is why some Americans are shocked when they move abroad long term. The honeymoon phase fades. Invitations slow down. Friendships stay surface level, and they can't quite explain why. It's not hostility, it's self-protection. Because when one culture dominates the space, even unintentionally, others learn to shrink around it. But here's the twist that rarely gets mentioned. The Americans who do notice this, who ask questions instead of explaining,